Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I have some enemies to lovers recommendations for you. So, one of my favorite tropes in romance books is the enemies to lovers trope. I feel like that's a pretty popular one. I feel like most people love that. And I honestly adore it. I feel like when an enemies to lovers trope is done to perfection, where you have that where they don't really want to like each other, but they do anyways, and then in the end, like, their love and their passion is like this, it's just like the best thing ever, and I just love it so much. So today I think I have 8 books here to talk about, and these are not necessarily my all-time favorite enemies to lovers books, but they are some that I've read this year that have really been standouts to me and that I will probably keep recommending for a long time. But I feel like in these books, that enemies to lovers push-pull, that payoff at the end when they get together is just done so well that I just wanted to share them with you. So, the first book that I have to recommend to you is Wicked Deeds on a Winter's Night by Kresley Cole. This is book 3 in the Immortals After Dark series, and I really feel like I could recommend any book from this series as enemies to lovers and it would be perfect, but I chose this one specifically because I feel like they have a really interesting dynamic and a kind of an extreme enemies to lovers case in this book. So this follows Bowen McCreeve, who is a Highland Lycae. So in the Immortals After Dark series, Lycae are like werewolves but not exactly a werewolf. But that's basically what we would think of them as, is a werewolf. And Mariquetta, who is a witch. And Bowen is very, very old, centuries old, and he actually found his fated mate. Fated mates is a huge concept in this book, in this world. He actually found his fated mate 100 years ago before he meets Mariquetta. And they weren't actually able to get together, Bowen and his fated mate, before she died. And Bowen has always felt like it was his fault that she died. So for centuries since she passed away, he's lived with this guilt and this torment about her death. And also, for a Lycae not to have a fated mate is like it's almost like torture to them to not have their fated mate with them. So he's had that whole dynamic of just being really anguished and not having his fated female. So he's a real sad being through the whole book, and through the first 2 books you see glimpses of him too. You could pick this up on its own. You wouldn't have to necessarily start with the first. So when he meets Mariquetta, the witch, now witches and Lycae don't get along, as very much the same way that werewolves and vampires don't get along. Like, they're enemies, they're really sworn enemies, and Bowen's family has a really bloody history specifically with witches, and it's very much a personal vendetta that he has against witches and why he hates them. And so when he meets Mariquetta, she's called Mari in the book too, he's really blown away with how attracted to her he is, and not necessarily just physically, although that's like really powerful. He's just really drawn to her, and he doesn't know why, and he really fights that with himself because he's supposed to hate her because she's a witch. So Mariquetta, on the other hand, is a little bit confused. She doesn't have that same level of animosity towards Bowen as a species, but the way he kind of treats her, she definitely feels like, listen, dude, you're kind of a dickhead. So she has a little bit of that hate for him too. But she also starts to feel the same attraction and connection to him, and when the plot comes along and something is threatening Mariquetta, Bowen gets very protective and does everything he can to save her and protect her, and during that they sort of soften towards one another and fall in love, and it's just really delightful. The level of animosity that Bowen has towards her is very high. I think it may be a little bit high for some people. I know that this is not necessarily a lot of people's favorite books in the series, but I've always just loved Bowen as a character, and I really loved seeing his story play out, and Mariquetta is just like, she's completely a bad bee. She's just awesome. I loved her. So this book, when I think of enemies to lovers, I think about Bowen and Mary. And the next book that I have is a historical romance, and this is Lady Sophia's Lover by Lisa Kleypas. This book is a really interesting take on the enemies to lovers trope because in this case, we have Sophia, who is very much, has a lot of animosity and hate towards Sir Ross, the hero. I think in most cases with enemies to lover, it's either pretty mutual or it's sometimes the hero for the heroine, but in this case, it's Lady Sophia who is the one who really kind of hates him, and she's the one who has to soften towards him. So this book is basically about Lady Sophia has had a really awful tragedy happen in her family, and she believes that Ross is the one who was responsible for that. So she is decided that she's going to do everything in her power to ruin him, to ruin his reputation, and to just really make him miserable. So she starts that by going to him and asking for a job and trying to get employed by him, and her plan is to basically seduce him and then to ruin him. But along the way, of course, she ends up falling for him as he very much starts to fall for her first, and their attraction and chemistry in this book was very high. It was very, very fun. I do feel like this book leaned a little bit more on the physical aspect of the relationship than the emotional, but it was still a really fun enemies to lovers romance, and I really think that this was a unique one just because of how Lady Sophia was the one who had such a problem with Ross, but also because it's in a historical setting, and it just was unique to me in that I hadn't really ever seen this before. It was a good read. I love Lisa Kleypas. This one was wonderful. And this next book is kind of a blast from the past. So this book is one that I dearly love. This book is Obsession by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So this, if you are familiar with her Lux series, the young adult series with the aliens, I'm not sure if you may have read this book or if you are even aware of it, but this is an adult spin-off of that Lux series, but it's a standalone. And another cool thing about this book is that you don't necessarily have to have read the Lux series to read this one. You could read this one on its own. It has a complete plot and world-building element to it. I adore this book. This is still one of my favorite Jennifer L. Armentrout books ever. I think it is really well done. It is very sexy. It is very fun. It's just wonderful. So the plot of this book is basically we have Hunter, who is employed by the Department of Defense, and his main job is basically to kill the bad guys. And so the whole book is basically about aliens on Earth, and the Department of Defense is to keep the humans from knowing about that the aliens exist. And there are two alien races. One is like the good race and one is the bad. And Hunter is from the bad alien race, which was pretty interesting because it gives you sort of a sympathetic look at a bad character or a bad type of group of aliens, I guess, for lack of a better word. So he ends up with a job that he is really not excited about because the job is to protect a human woman from people or the other alien team who is trying to kill her because she witnessed one of her friends be murdered by an alien, and she's not supposed to know that aliens exist. So this book has a lot of hate to love, and whew, it was really good. Now, granted, I read this book quite a few years ago, but I still have it in my brain of like, this is one of my favorite enemies to lovers that I've ever read. There's a lot of animosity between them. Hunter is really arrogant, kind of a jerk. Serena has a bit of a temper too, so they kind of butt heads a lot. And when Hunter especially finally starts to fall for Serena and realizes that he has feelings for her, it's just so wonderful. I loved it. So yeah, this is a great one for enemies to lovers. This is, I really love I still love the Lux series. I think they're just super fun, really fast paced. I love the romance in them too. And this one, because it was an adult, just like took that to another level, and I loved it. And the next book that I have to talk about is The Gravity of Us by Brittany C. Cherry. So this book really doesn't give you much of a plot synopsis on the back or on Goodreads, and I know that a lot of the plot in this one really revolves around sort of this unlayering of a lot of entanglements between the characters, so I'm not really sure how much I want to describe the plot in this. I don't really feel like you need to know the plot too much about this, but I will tell you a little bit about the characters. So the characters are Graham, who is our hero, and he is really the epitome of a grumpy hero. He's very grumpy, he's very cold, he's a little bit, taciturn and withdrawn. He's kind of a little bit of a jerk. And then we have Lucy, who is the sunshine character completely. She's kind of a hippie, fun, free-spirited, lighthearted character, and the way that those two personalities just contrast was so delightful in here. It was just very, very enjoyable. I loved all of the emotional elements in this book. If you know Brittany C. Cherry, if you've read any of hers, you probably have read this book, but Brittany C. Cherry is very famous for really emotionally hard-hitting, very romantic reads, and that is exactly what this book was. It was so powerful and lovely and just, honestly, very, very delightful. I loved their romance. It was definitely heartbreaking, too. There were some really sad moments in this, which is also kind of typical of Brittany C. Cherry, but the romance in this, the payoff of that grumpy sunshine coming together was delicious, and I loved it. There's also a little bit of a forbidden element in here too, so if you like that, then you may love this. It's not a very long book. I adore this whole series, and a lot of them in this series have a lot of enemies to lovers, romance, tropes, elements in there too. But I chose this one just because it's one of my favorites, and I don't think I've talked about this on my channel yet. And the next book that I have to recommend is actually a YA book, and I feel like this is one of the best YA books that I have read that does enemies to lovers the way that I like it done, and that is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. This book was so much fun. I loved the forbidden element of their romance in here. So this follows Lou, who is a witch, and she's, like all of the witches in the time in this world, are being hunted pretty extensively. So she doesn't have a lot of her powers, and she's kind of living on the edge. Her people are living on the edge and trying to stay hidden from the witch hunters or trying to exterminate them. And then we have Reed, the hero, who is a witch hunter, and his whole life has been guided by the philosophy of thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. So he is all about hunting witches and killing them. And the interesting thing about this couple especially is the role that like religion plays in there, and the way that he feels like it's a religious task that he has to exterminate witches that he believes are evil. So when him and Lou come together and you sort of see his opinion of what he's always believed to be true changed for the love he feels for this woman was just so good. Oh my gosh, Reed really starts out as kind of, well, he's just a really honorable man, very, very strong in his morals and wants to do what's right, and he struggles a lot with that component of actually loving a witch, and it was just really, really good. There's also a marriage of convenience in here. I think this would probably, I've heard people say it's a little bit on the new adult side instead of young adult, and I would say I would probably agree with that. I feel like this talks about some mature topics and themes a little bit more than your typical YA does, or at the very least it's on the older end of YA. So I definitely feel like this has crossover appeal to adult romance readers. It was really fun, a great fantasy. I really enjoyed it. And the next book I have to talk about is one of my favorite books of the year. It is my darling baby. You probably know what it is, and that is Baron by Joanna Shupe. This is the second book in her Knickerbocker series, which is all about a historical romance set in Gilded Age New York, so late 18th century. It's really, really a beautifully rich version of that time period, and the characters in here are just so well drawn out and well crafted and created, and it's just, oh, it's just so dang good. So this book follows Will, who is basically a railroad baron. He's very wealthy. He's created this vast, wealthy empire of being a successful railroad owner and creator, and he is, at this point in the book, he is running for lieutenant governor in that year's governor's race. And then we have Ava, who is not quite she's not really in the lowest class, but she's definitely a step down in class from Will. She's probably lower middle class, I would guess, and she is orphaned, and she's raising her siblings on her own, so she's trying to provide for them too. And she is a medium, so she has really worked to build up this career where she can be successful and earn enough money to support her family. It's basically just her being a great actress and portraying this role of a medium. So one day her and Will meet up at some type of like a seance that she has had hosting at night, because she's hosting it for the governor who Will is running with. And Will finds out about this, and he's very, very upset that this is happening because he doesn't want there to be any scandal or anything to dim his chance of winning this election with the governor. And he wants Ava to stay away from the governor and just leave him alone so that he doesn't have anything that might dim his chances of being elected. And Ava, sweet, being fiery woman that she is like, heck no, dude. I am making some good money. I like doing this job. Shut up and sit down, basically. She's very fiery, very, 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 very much like, not in like a way that you think is like offensive, but she does not put up with any crap that Will tries to give to her. She stands up for herself. She is not the type of woman that gets walked over. She's very strong, very powerful in what she's going to do and how protective she is of her family. And Will is so instantly attracted to her. They have so much chemistry, and the sparks between these two is just like all over the place. It's just so good. So seeing that transformation of Will really deciding that he has feelings for her and how is he going to handle that, and also to see how he risks everything for their love and a chance to be together, was just the stuff that Enemies to Lovers romance is made of. I love this book. I think it is just perfection, and it's one of my favorite books I've read this year. It's so good. And the next book that I have to talk about is Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin. This is a dark historical romance, and it is indeed very dark. It deals with some very difficult topics. It describes scenes on the page that are at times a little bit uncomfortable to read, but it is really, really powerful, really well done, and just a wonderful, powerful love story. I adore it. But I do want to say there are trigger warnings for rape, torture, infertility, death of a parent. There are a lot of trigger warnings in here. So if you're okay with that, I would highly recommend this. If you like dark romances, Enemies to Lovers, this is top notch, top tier, top level. Very, very good. So let me tell you a little bit about what this is about. So this follows Bennett, who is a female pirate, and she is basically on the run from her husband, Priest, who is a pirate, and he is really on the hunt for her, very possessively wants to get her to come back to him. And in that whole time when they're being chased, Bennett ends up being captured by Lord Ashley, who is a pirate hunter. So a lot of twisty-turny of the plot and relationships gets all laid out for you here, which I really don't want to talk about because I don't want to spoil anything for you because it's just so good to see it unravel. But when, in the end, when they all sort of end up together, they really collide in this battle that is all about protecting Bennett, and it's just very, very good. This has one of the strongest hate-to-loves that I've ever read. It's wonderful. But again, trigger warnings, so go into this prepared, but go into it if you are okay with that. And the last book that I have to recommend to you is Culti by Mariana Zapata. I love this book so very much. This is one of my favorite books of the year also. And so Mariana Zapata is definitely known for slow burn romances. I don't know that she's written anything that hasn't been a slow burn romance. So you really don't get them even kissing until very late in the book. But the way that she builds up the tension between the characters, in the relationship, is so well done that payoff in here was just perfect. I loved it. So this book is about Saul, who is a professional soccer player. She is just a really great athlete and has been in love with soccer her whole life. From the time that she was a little girl, she has had posters on her room of Rainier Culti, who was a phenomenal soccer star and who now suddenly shows up and is her coach. So there's also a little bit of an age gap in this too. And Culti, you really kind of hate him in the first part of this book because he's really kind of a jerk. He's very, very gruff and almost rude too. And Saul, there are a couple of scenes early on in this book when he kind of acts out in that towards people that she loves, when she literally takes no crap from him, that I just adored it. I loved it so much. They have a lot of feelings for each other but the Culti, of course, keeps them hidden for quite a long time. But when they finally get revealed and they finally come together, it's just so well done. It's just a fabulous, so good. I love this book. I think this is one of my favorite contemporary enemies to lovers that I've read. It's just really, really, really wonderful. And if you can hang with the slow burn, definitely give this one a try because it was worth it. Well, that's it. Those are my 8 books that I have to recommend to you today for enemies to lovers romance. I hope you enjoyed those recommendations, and let me know down below what your favorite enemies to lovers romance is so I can add that to my list and check it out, or we can talk about it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.